survey on national parks and state parks. And as we get into this more area dominated by freehold land, we do have some records for species that are more obvious when people come across, like koalas and quolls occasionally. But overall, there's way less records in the privately owned forest than there are in public forests, just due to there being a different level of survey having happened. So what we can do then is combine these things. We've got the habitat mapping, we've got the Atlas of New South Wales Wildlife and Survey records, we've got the predicted distributions that went into mapping those corridors, and we can also draw on ecological knowledge that we have of the area, and we can identify what are the key wildlife species for this area based on that sort of information. I just wanted to finish off with a bit of an introduction to some of the fauna that you may or may not be aware of from this area. So there's a whole suite of mammals with important habitats on the Dorrigo Plateau. This is a photo of a rufous bettong. We have a number of species that are threatened both nationally and in New South Wales. So the spotted-tailed quoll, which I've mentioned before, which I'm sure most landowners are pretty familiar with, especially with big chickens. Hastings River mouse, another high-profile species, koala obviously, and long-nosed cotoroo. These are all species that are threatened at the national level, so they're, if you like, a higher status in terms of conservation importance. And these four species have all been recorded from the Forest Project area. There may be one or two areas, I'm not sure all the brush-tailed rock wallabies have been recorded from the area. There may be some historical records of a few other species. But these are four extant species that still have populations on the Dorrigo Plateau. So they're nationally threatened. We have again, that's probably not a great colour to have chosen with the light, but there's a number of species that are threatened in New South Wales as well, and are known to have populations on the Dorrigo Plateau. So brush-tailed phascogale is a little carnivorous marsupial. I don't know if anyone's come across it. It has a brush tail which it fans out when it's excited. It's quite an amazing animal. Yellow-bellied glider, eastern pygmy possum, palmer wallaby, bettong, we've mentioned here. And there's a number of threatened bats as well, obviously. Bats are an incredibly important group of animals in their own right. Foraging for insects as they do, they're just the biomass of insects that bats feed on every night is just astronomical. If it wasn't for bats, we'd be drowning also. So, yeah, an incredibly important group that have important habitats on the Dorrigo Plateau. So just to reinforce that with some examples of those species, the spotted-tailed quoll, obviously one of the most charismatic Australian animal, if not the most charismatic Australian animal, I think. But an animal that a lot of the community is just unaware of, really, unless you're a landowner getting raided for your chickens, you wouldn't know about quolls, but they are an incredible animal and incredibly important as the top predator in our forests.
How would they go as a cat?
Sorry?
How would they go as a cat?
I don't think there's any direct predation by either species. Maybe the young ones may get predated, but there's certainly competition for resources with cats and cats. No, they wouldn't be controlling cats. No. They're certainly impacted by competition with foxes, cats, dogs, etc. So just briefly reiterating some of those points, they're endangered nationally. Dorrigo is part of a nationally important population for quolls, which extends right up to Chumundi, Gold Creeks and the Gorges. There's some important populations up there as well. It's declined in a lot of its range, so that places even greater importance on places where it still occurs. And tree hollows and large logs are particularly important for quolls themselves, but also for their prey. So quolls will climb large trees to hunt and possums and gliders and whatever else they can find in tree hollows. And they'll also nest in the tree hollows themselves. They'll also nest in sheltering logs, big logs, and they'll use logs as travel routes through dense shrubby understories as well. So logs and tree hollows are a particularly important resource for these animals, and their resources, as we get onto later, that can be impacted by fire. And their recovery and protection is really revolves around habitat protection and also the maintenance of links, forested links that have been moved. So it's the corridors we were talking about before. Koalas. Again, vulnerable. New South Wales koalas are listed as a vulnerable species at the national level, and also obviously within New South Wales. Dorrigo supports an important population. North Dorrigo, probably scatters of koala records right throughout the Western Dorrigo Plateau. And another point here is that coastal koala populations, where a lot of the emphasis has been on their conservation and habitat mapping, etc., those populations are under really severe threat through pressures such as dogs, disease, stress-induced disease, being bowled over on the highway, habitat loss associated with urban expansion. So the fact that those coastal populations are by no means secure and they're in decline, it places maybe even greater importance on hinterland populations, such as the Dorrigo Plateau, and the populations that extend along the escarpment, etc. And again, their protection, as for most of these species, depends on habitat protection and also the maintenance or the restoration of links between those habitats as well. Another highly charismatic species, one of my favourite forest fauna, is the yellow-bellied glider. People may or may not know of this species. It's an amazing charismatic species, as I said. It has this incredible call which echoes throughout the forest. It's just almost indescribable unless you hear it. It's a cross between a koala and a pig or something. I don't know. It's just a Donald Duck mixed in. Yeah, Donald Duck mixed in as well. And this slide was actually taken with a remote camera home in on this hollow. The hollow was around behind this tree, and this animal was using this hollow tree. They are totally dependent on big hollow trees for nesting and roosting. They're also dependent on big mature trees for foraging in. You may see signs. I was talking to Trish and Terry before about you might find signs of yellow-bellied gliders on your property even if you don't hear them. They make incisions in the trunk. This is probably not one, that's probably just a wound, but they make these V-shaped or horizontal incisions, and that makes the sap flow out of the tree, and the gliders feed from the sap. Other animals do as well. So they're an important species within our forests. So here, Dorrigo supports important population. The populations of yellow bellies are often a good indicator of quality habitat, of very good habitat. Again, their conservation is dependent on connections and habitat. We'll move along a bit more here. Birds that are important on the Dorrigo Plateau, the glossy black cockatoo as an example. And we have a number of birds that are threatened in New South Wales. We don't have any nationally listed threatened bird species. There may be the odd records of region honeybees or swift parrots coming through the feeding season available resources, but in terms of resident populations, these are the types of species that would occur here. The fruit doves, the glossy black cockatoo, the owls, the tree owls. Another species is the Verus sitella, an insectivorous bird that you might see hopping around upside down on trees looking for insects, it's bark fishes, etc. And in terms of highlighting a group, large forest owls. This is a particularly important area for large forest owls, courtesy of the habitats available, courtesy of the availability of hollow-bearing trees, and for the owls themselves, here's a young, pre-fledgling, powerful owl. And it's not only for the owls themselves that hollows are important, but also for the animals that they feed on as well. So, the powerful sooty and marsh owls all occur in this area. There's even potential for barking owls to be recorded occasionally. But another non-threatened species is the boobook owl. I'm sure you all hear boobook owls occasionally. Again, Dorrigo Plateau supports probably nationally important habitat, particularly for powerful and sooty owls, and very important habitat for marsh owls. They occupy very large home ranges in the order of thousands of hectares. And obviously they rely on the presence of prey populations, and those hollow trees are really important in that context. Owls. Reptiles with important habitats on the plateau. This is a far-sided skink. Threatened in New South Wales, we have Stephen's bandit snake, an amazing snake, an arboreal snake which shelters in tree hollows. It is obliged, it requires tree hollows for shelters, usually in big trees. So that's, I'll get into a bit more on that in a minute. That's terrible colours again, sorry. Priority, while we don't have a lot of other threatened reptiles in this part of the world, we do have a lot of species that are considered to be priorities for conservation, and you could maybe think of these as near threatened almost, if things don't go right for them in the long term. There's a whole suite of fauna that could fall into decline and become threatened species. Things like skinks, various skinks that all rely on hollow logs as a habitat resource. Carpet python, it's reasonably common, but it's again reliant on shelters in tree hollows and logs.
And chook sheds.
Chook sheds, yeah. Up here we have the alpine copperhead, an amazing snake which prefers these higher elevation grassy open forests. And another one is the dwarf parasite. So these are all priority species of reptiles. As I said, Stevens banded snake is a feature. This photo is again taken with a remote camera, set up on this tree hollow, and it shows again just the importance, the overwhelming importance of large hollow-bearing trees in the landscape, and the importance of protecting those and nurturing them. This one spent the whole time that camera was there, basically, it spent curled up, basking in this tree hollow.
Just show us where it is.
Oh, sorry. There's the snake there. Curled around, that's the tree hollow.
Yeah.
So the camera's up above the tree, and that's the snake curled up in the tree hollow. Pretty much indicated. It's present on the plateau, but there's only a handful of records coming so far. There's quite a cryptic species of pretty more here than we know. And as I said, really highly dependent on large tree hollows for shelter and large tracts of moist open forest. Corridors again are important for that species. Frogs with important habitats. We're getting towards the end of this. We've gone through all the vertebrates. This is the New England tree frog. Threatened nationally, we have the stuttering frog, the barred frog, which you may have come across. It's quite a large, again, charismatic frog, which I have a slide of in here, but it's a nationally threatened species. We also have the pouched frog, the sphagnum frog, and this is the New England tree frog, all with important populations that extend out to the Dorrigo Plateau. This is the stuttering frog. Again, as I said, they get quite big females are pretty amazing. They rely on, they breed adjacent to creeks with high quality water and high quality lid layers, where they lay their eggs above the creek. And again, Dorrigo Plateau, they're more of a high elevation frog in this part of the world, and Dorrigo Plateau supports important headwater habitats. So that's largely it. In my next talk, I've also introduced some concepts around invertebrates as well. That just gives you an idea of some of the key forest fauna and how they fit in the landscape. So, thanks for that.
Has anyone got any questions at all they'd like to ask Dave at this stage?
Do frogs move around?
Most like stuttering frogs, those big barred frogs are amazing. They have really high psychability. The adults will stay in a localised area. Like you might come back over a number of seasons and you'll find the same frog within 10 square metres of where it was before. But then when they lay their eggs and the tadpoles emerge, if a rain event occurs and a flood comes through the creek, that's how often they get dispersed, linearly along creek lines, etc. And then occasionally some of the adult frogs will move across ridges. So they're capable of movement. They're all capable, particularly the tree frogs, and even the stagnant frogs and the assa, the little pouch frog. They are capable of movement, but the smaller the frog and the smaller the limbs of the frog, generally the less mobile they are. Some of the tree frogs have quite big limbs and they are quite mobile. They can move across ridges. There's a lot. And you'll notice around your own property you might not see frogs for ages, and when you do get a big downpour of rain, you probably get red-eyed tree frogs and other species sitting on your windows and they're looking for insects. All of a sudden they've emerged from wherever they were and they've moved to where the lights are attracting insects and things like that.
What's it called? Stirring frog.
Sorry, we've got... stirring frog, it just relates to its call.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's stuck in the foot. That's a hard one, actually.
It's very in front of the mic.
That's quite good.
Actually, after the big rain a couple of weeks ago, I heard something that sounded like a duck, but I don't think it was a duck.
That would be the red-eyed tree frog.
It was something. It was at night, and it was like wow.
If you go down to the creek, you'll see with a light.
So which one is that?
Red-eyed tree frog.
Red-eyed tree frog.
Victoria Forest.
Okay.
Yeah, if you go down to the creek, you'll see them sitting above the creek. Just the males calling and the females.
So that's not a
It's not a threatened species, but it's one you don't see until it does rain.
What sort of trees do koalas? What's that?
In this part of the world, what would be the preferred trees? Grey gums, New England blackbuck, mistmate, tallowood, obviously. There's a suite of trees. Every part of the koala's range is a different suite of trees that they prefer to forage on. So those sorts of species on the coast, you get more different suite of species as you get up in the tablelands. Things like that. Certainly, they'll forage in quite a range of species up here, but the preferred ones would be tallowood. Blue gum, might they foraging? Mistmate.
Actually, the university koala that was foraging on the local leptosperm.
Oh yeah, well that's right.
We found that really interesting.
Yeah.
There's no records for the koala eating leptosperm.
Yeah, and they use certain trees for foraging, and they use other trees for shelter, particularly on hot days. They might move into shrubs with a dense canopy for shelter. Obviously, they'll overheat if they're sitting in an open canopy and just getting the sun on them all day. So they will move in response to the prevailing conditions.
This is actually feeding.
Yes, that's great. That's great.
I think another point with the koalas is about nutrition. So on the Dorrigo Plateau, there's a lot of very fertile areas, and the koalas are in the greatest numbers in the more nutritious areas.
What's the incidence of like chlamydia and some of those koala diseases that are the coastal koalas? Are you finding that up here on the tablelands?
I don't think it's a huge issue up here on the tablelands. I don't know why there's so many records of animals, koalas coming in with chlamydia.
Not up here.
It's more a coastal thing where the animals, the populations are under stress from habitat loss.
Management we get a lot.
Yeah. It seems to be a stress-related thing.
Yeah, most of the ones I've seen seem pretty healthy.
Yeah.
I just wonder if like if my cousin was quite so healthy, that might do that.
It's potentially, could occur.
What are the time with dogs, the size of your thumb,
There's a whole potentially 30 species of frog up here. Frogs up here, ranging from the little pouch frog, they're tiny little things which you'll hear calling in wet forests, rainforests, to, as Mike said, the little froglets, they're called crinias. Crinia signifera is one, or eastern froglet. Tiny little things, and hard to identify. Most of those 30 species have distinctive calls, so when you're familiar with the calls, you can go into an area and without having to find the frogs, you can identify them from the calls.
There is a frog called up in Manlo.
Yeah.
It's very, very good.
Yeah.
Have you never met We had a conference with them and I didn't see it, but they went back to take the call, and it was one of those little cat frogs.
Yeah, I had a patch frog last time I was up. That's all you. Yeah. It's like a little quiet, it's a quiet little yapping. Yeah, the males, the female lays the eggs, and when they hatch, the male basically stays with the eggs, and when they hatch, little tadpoles and male they swim with this sort of slime associated with the eggs, and the male himself, and he has pouches, just flanks him on his back, and the little tadpoles, a handful of them, swim or move into these pouches. And that acts like a small pond, basically, where the tadpole develops and metamorphoses into tiny little frogs. Yeah.
The ones that don't have a pouch to live too, or?
Sorry?
The ones that don't get the
No, they have to be in the pouch too. But that's a unique thing. It's a unique law. There is a gastric brooding frog which does a similar thing. Pouch frogs are unique.